And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. It's the most important day of the week because it's the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. I'm Jim Lakely, Vice President of the Heartland Institute, and we have a terrific show for you today. There's no other show like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere, so I hope you will like, share, and subscribe, and also personally tell folks about it. The more the merrier in our live chats on YouTube and Rumble. And just a reminder, because big tech and legacy media do not like the way we cover climate and energy news and policy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel, where this is its main home, has been demonetized by Alphabet/Google/YouTube. So if you want to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. TCRS stands for The Climate Realism Show, and help us keep making this show happen every single week. Any support that you can give us is greatly appreciated. So today, as usual, with us is Dr. H. Sterling Burnett. He's the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. We also have Anthony Watts, senior fellow at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the most influential climate website in the world, What's Up With That? And we also have Linnea Lueken. She's research fellow for energy and environment policy at Heartland and the star of our Climate at a Glance video series right here on the Heartland Institute YouTube channel and on Rumble. Be sure to check those out on this very channel. And we put out 1 or 2 new videos every single week. Nice to see you guys all here.
It's great to be here. As always, we love it.
Yep.
And we love our audience.
Good to be back. Fridays are always fun.
For sure. And we also have a special guest, as you can see, if you're watching the stream right now, that we are going to be discussing the Republican Party's energy and climate platform as the GOP convention just ended in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee just last night. We are also happy to welcome back somebody who's perfect to talk about this topic, our special guest, Steve Milloy. He's the publisher of junkscience.com. It's the must-read website for those interested in learning how much of the government-approved media and media-promoted climate science is actual junk. The journal Nature called Steve Milloy, quote, perhaps the most influential climate science contrarian in the world. And he's on the show today, actually, because he called me a climate hero on X, just so I could put that in my bio. So welcome, Steve Milloy.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
That's great. Well, we are, one of the reasons we have you back on the show, Steve, is because you were also part of Donald Trump's transition team for the Environmental Protection Agency for his first term. And if he's elected again, we're going to be talking about what should be the 45th president's climate and energy agenda if and when he becomes our 47th president. Yeah. So, he gave his closing address, his nominating speech last night. It was quite moving. It was quite lengthy. I think Joe Biden probably had to take a nap in the middle of it. I don't think he would have gotten through 90 minutes. To be honest, I almost needed a nap. It was pretty late.
You're assuming Joe Biden was still awake by the time it started. So
that's true. And if
no way. 10 o'clock, there's no way.
He checks out at 8.
That's right. If Donald Trump proved anything at all, is that he's quite active and spry, even as late as midnight Eastern time. But he said in his address, "Drill, baby, drill," and I believe even the people in attendance even chanted that. So
yes, there was a chant going on. The whole crowd was chanting.
Yes,
not the first time during the convention.
That is true. And so that's very timely, very interesting, and we're going to be discussing that agenda pretty closely. Anthony, you had something to say?
Well, I was just thinking about one of the things we got coming up in crazy climate news about chanting in the RNC.
True with that. So yes, so we're gonna, before we get into all of that into detail with Steve and our regular panel here, we are going to do one of Anthony Watts's very favorite segments of this program, and it is the crazy climate news of the week. These are stories that people here at the Heartland Institute share with each other in Slack, saying, "Can you believe this crazy, this crazy media story about the climate?" And the first one was one of those that was shared. It's from Newsweek, and the headline is "Unprecedented Sea Level Rise is Making Earth's Days Longer." It says that climate change may actually be slowly changing the length of the day on Earth, according to a new paper in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. This is the result, they say, of sea levels rising because of increased temperatures and the melting of the polar ice caps, thereby causing a redistribution of mass from the poles of our planet toward the equator. Modern climate change is unprecedented, the paper states. The melting of ice sheets and global glaciers result in sea level rise, a pole to equator mass transport, increasing Earth's lateness and resulting in an increase in the length of the day. Now, a day on Earth is about 86,400 seconds long. But the rate of the length of day change, according to this paper, Anthony Watts, has accelerated to 1.33 plus or minus 0.03 milliseconds per century since 2000. So Anthony, I have to ask you, did you notice this? Has it interrupted your sleep? You missing the start of your favorite TV show by milliseconds, thus ruining your whole evening?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I being a broadcaster, I am so focused on time, and being on time. This just totally destroyed my life. Those few tenths of a or hundredth of a thousandth of a millisecond, whatever the hell it is. Point about this is that this is the most. This study is a bunch of crap, and I'm sorry. That's the only way to describe it, and it's because the length of day has been changing long before climate change ever became an issue, long before we had any melting at the poles. It's actually gone up and down over the millennia. Geologists know this. They understand this. Climatologists, not so much. And so, this hype over this tiny fraction of a change in the length of day is of no consequence to anyone. But climate is to blame, and you're at fault because you drive an SUV.
Yeah. My thinking on this is, I wonder how long throughout history we've been able to measure point something milliseconds.
They can't. This is all a freaking computer model, Sterling.
So no one's actually measured any time change. And let's say the computer models are right. I don't want to say that they're wrong. If it's happening because sea levels are rising, then certainly when sea levels were much higher than they are today, it happened before. And when sea levels were much lower than today, the Earth was slower. It's just ridiculous. All I care about is when I'm wearing a watch or I'm looking at my cell phone for time, is it accurate to within the nearest minute? Milliseconds are beneath my margin of error.
Yeah. The only people that notice this stuff are people that study climate for a living. The rest of the world doesn't give a shit. I'm sorry. That's the facts.
Well, it's a good thing our channel's already demonetized, Anthony, because you would have just clinched it with that little first.
The larger problem here, and this is typical of all these climate studies, is that this is not really science. I mean, what they've done is predict that in 75 years or 76 years, the day is going to be 2 milliseconds, longer or short, whatever. And the problem is, that's okay as a prediction, but then the science part of it is waiting to see if it actually happens. And so, these guys have just basically made an unverifiable prediction, which is good for, a cheap hit in a newspaper, to alarm people about climate. But, none of us are going to be alive to see whether it ever comes true. So it's not really science. It's just crap. It's like Anthony said.
And whoever is alive, if it comes true, won't recognize the fact that it's
Right.
2 milliseconds longer.
Right.
Nothing is
Right.
measured in milliseconds except maybe trading on the floor of the stock exchange.
Yeah, and then I'm still not convinced that they can measure sea level rise so precisely that they could actually reliably say that, in 76 years, if sea level rise was constant, that it's going to be 2 milliseconds long. I just don't believe that.
Yeah. Well, the other important thing is they can't separate how much of that sea level rise is caused by man-made climate change versus just simply natural progression coming out of the little ice age. They haven't separated that. All they're simply saying is stuff melted, it threw the earth out of balance, it's wobbling a little bit, and therefore the length of day changed. They don't really attribute which is the real cause here.
Right.
Well, and a geologist that contributes to What's Up With That, David Middleton, pointed out that, there's no way, there are no, Cretaceous measurements of length of day, right? This is all reconstruction stuff. And
you mean proxy data is not that refined?
It's probably not that refined.
Oh, okay.
You know what?
Until Michael Mann gets to it.
Yeah,
Right.
I will bet the big Microsoft outage today was caused by a drift in the clock in the Microsoft servers due to the change in length of day. That's what they're going to say, right?
Yeah, I'm decently confident that they didn't have like laser gyroscopes in the Cretaceous to make those measurements. But I'm not a climate scientist, so maybe I don't know. But
yeah. Well, hey, Steve Milloy, climate hoax slayer at Junk Science on X, didn't you tweet something on X recently that the ice extent in the Arctic is actually on the higher side than the last few years, or did I misread?
Well, no, since the satellite era started, Arctic sea ice extent had declined a little bit, but then for the last 20 years, it's kind of just been stable, even though emissions have, continued to skyrocket, and allegedly global warming has, it was the hottest year ever, but Arctic sea ice is about where it was 20 years ago. So do emissions have any effect at all? I'm not convinced.
Yeah, and you mentioned that on your X account that everyone should follow at Junk Science quite often. That if every emission is supposed to be warming us, why doesn't the data reflect that? And that's
that's the con. Every emission warms the planet, and emissions drive warming, and there's just no data to back that up.
Yep.
This business where, they go back and say, well, look at the trend. Well, I don't think trends mean anything. They don't mean what they think they mean.
Right.
I'll say this. If I start getting hungry earlier than my normal meal time, I'll know the time has changed. The Earth's clock is off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go on.
Just on the last word on this. I mean, this is how desperate they are, right? I mean, this is total nonsense. It's total nonsense to anybody. When you start talking about milliseconds of a day, I mean, crazy.
Right. So what that means is every 4 years, when they have to add a leap second, it's going to be 1.3 milliseconds longer.
Yeah.
EFD.
A leap millisecond, because this was a portion of milliseconds.
Yep, 100%. All right, let's move on to our second item here of 3, and this is a story from Axios. Axios is Politico for dummies in the way they write their stories. It says the headline is "Climate Change is Upending NATO's Operations." NATO is paying more attention to the security risks of climate change, along with warming's implications in the Arctic, a new report shows. The 75-year-old Security Alliance has unique capabilities to analyze and prepare for the challenges that a warming world poses. Such threats range from melting sea ice and Russia's provocative moves to boost its military bases in the Arctic, to increasing migration flows into Europe and North America from the climate-fueled extreme weather events, also known as climate refugees, which we just did a video on this week on this channel by Linnea, so you should check that out. That's another myth. It notes that Russia has not incorporated climate change into its military planning, like the United States has, foolishly. And while China has a more forward-leaning strategy, whatever. I actually think Russia's probably very eager for global warming so they can get more ships into the Arctic above their nation. The analysis shows that NATO allies are already experiencing climate change effects in the form of extreme weather events, including floods, heat waves, and wildfires. And this has led to military deployments to help civilian authorities, such as 2,000 military personnel deployed within Canada to fight that country's worst wildfire season on record last year. The story continues. We'll put it in the show notes later for people to check out. But I brought this story up, guys, because this is one of a series of stories we've heard over the years that supposedly proves the myth of when Joe Biden would say something, and John Kerry used to say this too, that climate change is the greatest existential threat to humanity, that it's our number one enemy, and that we are wasting time, resources, and harming readiness by preparing our military for climate change and not for enemies of the United States.
Well, to be clear, Biden said very recently that climate change is the only existential threat to humanity. Not even Donald Trump is the existential threat. Climate change is, according to Joe Biden, certainly not nuclear war or anything like that. I remember a time when we thought of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as a military organization, not a welfare redistributor, not a firefighting unit, but something to prepare for conflict and to deter conflict. Did a great job of that in between Russia and Ukraine there. So, if they're getting wrapped up in climate matters, I'm afraid their mission creep is occurring here. And you look at the Canadian wildfires. Yeah, were they historic? I don't doubt that based on acreage burned, they were. Were they caused by climate change? No evidence of that whatsoever. In fact, wildfires have been declining over the period of climate change. Who says so? Well, NASA and the European Space Agency satellites both say so.
They were caused by arson, is what they were caused by.
Some of them were caused by arson, but others weren't. A lot of it, their own research, their own body of researchers said, well, you had a lot of fuel. And why did you have a lot of fuel? Because the weather's been pretty good and we've been getting rainfall. And so you got a lot of forest and you have one bad dry season and a heat. And so when fires start, it's hard to put out because there's a lot more fuel. Yeah. So, hurricanes haven't been getting worse. Flooding hasn't been getting worse. And neither has migration due to climate change. Migration's a bad thing, from economics in South America to war in the Middle East and tyranny. People are trying to get away from all sorts of things, but what they're not trying to run from is the weather.
Right. I mean, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. So NATO is about firing or dropping nuclear weapons on was the Soviet Union and now Russia. I mean, there's no way NATO could ever have fielded troops to fight Soviet armies during the Cold War. So they were planning on firing nuclear weapons at them. And this mission creep into climate is just absolutely ridiculous. I just want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that Joe Biden said that global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius is worse than nuclear war. And for the last 12 months, if you believe the climate hoaxers, we've exceeded 1.5 Celsius. Is this worse than nuclear war? Climate is just it's this mental disease. So once it grips your mind, you can't think anymore.
Yeah,
I mean, Anthony, you can't think logically to start with for some of these people.
Yeah. I mean, this is just another example of the hundreds that we've pointed out on this show just in the last year of climate alarmism, the cult mindset infecting every institution, not just in the United States, but all around the world.
Yeah. It's an all of government approach to climate madness.
Yep.
Right. Climate madness. Indeed. One thing I think they're really worried about NATO, they're probably worried they're going to have to support remaking the movie Ice Station Zebra up in the Arctic. They're going to have to change that to Meltwater Station Zebra, and that's going to be catastrophic. Right?
Well, I don't know, Anthony, there was a study that came out, I think maybe last week or the week before, about how, they were hoping that the Northwest Passage would be a little less clogged with ice, but
Right.
there's still like these huge chunks of ice in there. So it's not really working out like they thought.
You remember 150 years ago, they were longing for the day when the Northwest Passage opened up, right? They weren't fearing it. They were hoping that the ice would melt so they'd have a quicker route across the top of the earth.
Well,
that was the dream. That was what most of the explorers were undertaking, was trying to find the Northwest Passage.
Yeah.
You know, I think NATO's real concern, or, you know, something that they are probably more concerned about, is their obsolescence. You know, they keep saying, oh, Trump will take us out of NATO. Trump hates NATO. Oh, look, they're worried they're going to have to pay their own bills. They're worried they have to step up. I would wager climate change is pretty far down the list of concerns with the election and the wars on their borders.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to our last item here. This was pointed out by Anthony Watts, actually, in our internal communications, and it's because he doesn't even like oysters, so he doesn't care about this. But people who do like oysters probably do care about this. And that is this story here, from Delish. Oysters and mussels contain disturbingly high levels of fiberglass, according to a new study. One researcher called it a stark reminder of the hidden dangers in our environment. If your summer diet includes eating all the oyster hours and mussels you can find, you might want to rethink that. According to a new research published by the Journal of Hazardous Materials, high levels of fiberglass have been found inside both types of seafood. Apparently, the oysters are, they're filter eaters, and they are filtering the seawater around them to consume what they need to survive, and fiberglass ends up getting in there.
Yeah, there's a way to spin this, Jim. There's a way to perfectly spin this for the people that like this. They can just simply say, oysters are high in fiber.
Yes, I was about to say, my doctor keeps telling me more fiber in my diet, more fried oysters for me. I can't tell the crunch. I can't tell the crunch from the fry from the crunch from the fiberglass. So
yeah, I mean, well, a little bit of sand in the oyster is kind of part of the experience anyway. So I guess we can just do that with fiberglass.
Oh, the next time I bite into one and I feel something hard and pull it out, maybe I'll think it's fiberglass rather than a pearl they missed.
True.
I want to give some context to this study, because I did do some digging into this one. It was getting promoted on Twitter, and that's how I came across it initially, by someone who is a environmentalist group that is concerned with wind turbine pollution in the oceans from offshore wind off of England. And so while this it's actually kind of not a very good, like the way that Delish is promoting this story is rather stupid, actually. They're implying that because this study that occurred, they took their oyster samples from one harbor in South England, like in a harbor where, you don't normally eat oysters from inside a harbor in the first place, but inside a harbor. And the scientists who did the actual study itself said that the fiberglass probably came from people doing boat repair in the harbor. But the study authors were suggesting that, well, if we found this here, then that must mean that, it's dangerous to eat oysters in general, or it's boat manufacturing, like having boats in the ocean is bad for the environment because they're going to leak fiberglass or whatever. But the point is, this can be, if they're worried about this and what just happened in Nantucket with a fiberglass, wind turbine blade flying off or breaking off, and them having parts of it wash up on the beach, and them having to close miles of beaches because of the hazard. It makes you wonder, though, if this is something you guys are concerned about with, a couple of boats doing some repair, like patch and repair inside of a harbor, what's going to happen when these things fall apart in the next northeaster that comes through?
Right.
Well, go ahead.
And that's an area. And if the Rhode Island ones start, or, the ones off of Rhode Island and New York and stuff start shedding, fiberglass and stuff, those are areas where it's going to end up in oysters that people actually eat, not in an enclosed harbor that everyone knows that those are going to be full of bacteria. And I live in an area that's a big oyster area. You don't eat the oysters inside the harbor. That would be bananas.
They get oil and leaked gas and all sorts of things. But let me say, I don't wish harm on marine mammals, but I kept thinking, God, if that blade had shattered and thrown itself into the ocean and struck a whale or a dolphin, maybe they'd take the threat to these things
Why
more.
would they care? Whales
Yeah.
are washing up.
I mean, at least then we'd have proof. Oh, a wind turbine killed X, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have proof with the blade sticking out of its blowhole.
Well,
Right.
But
Well, hold on, Sterling. Hold on. So it's funny you mentioned that because we actually, I went through the trouble of making this video and putting it in here. So we're going to put it in the show. This is a story. Yes, as people in the chat have mentioned, and it was my next item, the last item in the crazy climate news, is that a wind turbine off the coast of Nantucket, one of the blades, 300 feet long, I believe, flew off and landed in the ocean, and they had to close the beaches. And when the really rich people start having their summers interrupted by wind power, that's when we may actually see real change. So, Andy, if you want to add that vineyard video to the stream, please.
Quickly shut down today after pieces of a wind turbine were discovered floating in the water and, as you can see, washing ashore. Tourists who pay big bucks to vacation there couldn't swim in the local beaches. And just hours later, Vineyard Wind shut down operations. The broken turbine about 20 miles off of the island, and it resulted in some pieces, some large, some sharp, watching up on the south side of the island and raising even more concern about those controversial turbines.
Like right now on Nantucket, they have closed the beaches because they don't want people getting impaled by shards of fiberglass.
The local fishing community raising concerns over the story and photos our friends at the Nantucket Current first reported. Pieces of broken wind turbine in the water and on the beach. Nantucket's harbor master shutting down all south-facing beaches. Vineyard Wind shutting down operations.
Each one of these blades is longer than a football field. And if they are snapping in half and sending shards of debris in all directions, that is extremely unsafe.
Megan Lapp is the fisheries liaison for Sea Freeze of Rhode Island and an outspoken critic of wind turbines and the impact of the local fishing community, and now about safety.
And people should really start asking themselves, what if there's a hurricane? What happens then? Do many blades break? What happens? And who's responsible for that?
Vineyard Wind in a statement acknowledging the break, but unsure of what caused it, says they are working with the Coast Guard and island leaders in the cleanup. Lapp even more concerned about the turbines being built in local waters, far beyond the ones off the block.
And there are multiple projects planned of hundreds of turbines combined. They join with south of Massachusetts, hundreds of turbines. There's probably going to be like 1,000 turbines in that block, with blades longer than a football field.
Island residents and tourists on the ultra-expensive vacation spot grow frustrated. Critics say we all need to start asking questions about the projects that local and federal government is greenlighting.
If we're already seeing this kind of problem for a project that isn't even finished being built yet, we need to stop and we need to really think about what we're doing.
Now, NBC 10 independently reached out to the harbor master on Nantucket, and we were referred to the statement, which we reported on to you. There's uncertainty when these beaches will be reopened, but it's got the attention of more than just tourists and residents of that island.
Darn right. It's got our attention, which is important for everybody else. Anthony, you know, wind power is just wonderful. It's way out offshore, and nobody has to really even see it, and it gives us all free energy. It's free, Anthony Watts. I guess, as I mentioned before, when this starts to affect the lives of the super wealthy who can vacation on Nantucket, I think that's really starting to finally open up eyes and have people ask questions.
Yeah, well, the only thing I can say to this is I'm going back to something from my childhood. There was a turbine from Nantucket. Fill in the blanks.
There once was a turbine from Nantucket.
Anthony, I warned you about our monetization. You have to stop getting us.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, but you know, this is a perfect example of the law of unintended consequences. You know, we got to rush to build these wind turbines. We got to save the planet. We got to reduce the CO2, all this stuff. They're blinded by their vision, and they're not paying attention to what might happen down the road. And it's the same thing with the land-based wind turbines. They have to bury these things, bury the blades when they wear out. And these blades, you know, they flex in the wind, and it just eventually they break down and they have to take them off, and then they got no place to put them. You can't put them in a landfill. You can't do that. So they bury them. And we've got pictures that we showed on this show in the past of, giant mass graves of wind turbine blades. And now they're dumping them in the ocean unintentionally. Yeah, it's a real mess.
Yeah.
It's worse than that though. So they're on the beach, right? You see these large chunks. Okay, you see large chunks. Look, when I get fiberglass, when I go up in my attic, I don't get large chunks of fiberglass in my skin. I get little bitty things that you can't even see. When this thing shreds, little bitty pieces of fiberglass that if you're walking on the beach, you can get in your feet or whatever. And worse still, by the way, Jim, I mean, you talked about it being free. It's the most expensive form of free energy in existence, offshore wind. So what we know from land-based wind turbines is that they've got a problem called leading edge erosion. Wind and storms, just like any plastics, they erode. So you get microplastics breaking off. It turns out it's probably ruining farmers' fields, something they didn't expect when they were told they could farm right up to the edge. Well, no, not so much when you got bisphenol A and several chemicals that the EPA regulates eroding from these things. And everyone's worried about microplastics in the oceans. I constantly hear concern about microplastics in the oceans. Well, you talk about leading edge erosion, tons of microplastics come off these things on land. There's no reason for thinking even more amounts won't come from the oceans where the winds are heavier, where the storms are harder. And none of this was considered in the environmental impact statements that were put together for these wind farms.
Right. And
you're ringing all sorts of bells here. I've got to go back to the oysters and the fiberglass. I mean, this is not new. If there's fiberglass and oysters, it's not new. And what the study actually shows is that the fiberglass and oysters is having no health effect on people because no one's ever noticed before. We've got to use sophisticated technology to look for this stuff to find out that it's there because you can't tell otherwise. As to what Sterling was, let's go back to microplastics. Microplastics, we've been using plastics for heavily for 80 years. They're all over the place. Little bits of plastic. They're basically inert to humans. I mean, that's why plastics are such a great storage material because they're basically inert. We eat them, they get excreted. And it's the same with these. If you eat an oyster with fiberglass, it's inert. It's just going to go through you. All these stories about microplastics nonsense. Sterling mentioned bisphenol A, part of the endocrine disruptor scare. I can go on and on and on about the junk science behind all of this.
Yeah,
I'm not. I wasn't trying to imply that. I know. I'm going to eat my fried oysters regardless.
There you go.
There are people that
in a future movie.
Yeah, there are people that won't, and they're constantly telling me I've got to be afraid of these things. Yeah. Well, then why aren't you afraid of these wind turbines?
Right.
Yeah. Well, Linnea, I'll go to you real quick on this, and then we can get on to our main topic. But the woman in that story pointed out the obvious that this happened. It closed down the beach. This was a single blade of 3 on a single turbine. Mm-hmm. And offshore wind is really still only in its infancy stages. There are plans all up and down the Atlantic seaboard where there will be thousands and thousands and thousands of these, which of course increases the chance of accidents like this on an exponential scale. So this is just the beginning.
Yeah, well, maybe some of our European audience can help me with, if they know of any other stories of like North Sea wind turbines going down, because, if you work in the oil industry and you go and work in the North Sea, you would know, or if you spend any time there at all, that it's very violent conditions. And I think they do have some large wind turbine fields there. I don't know what makes these ones different, but they seem to be not quite so sturdy. Maybe they did not put in anywhere near the right factor of safety that they should have. Whatever it is, I don't particularly trust the industry to report honestly about what it is that made it so that one of these turbines is breaking in like relatively mild wind conditions. When they're supposed to be rated for much, much worse. They try to anticipate things like hurricanes and whatnot. I don't believe that the engineers are going to just be totally oblivious to the fact that there's really bad weather out there. But obviously something has gone wrong. Something's been overlooked, and they're putting these up really fast without having, like smallish pilot programs or something.
That's okay.
To begin with.
The rush.
I think not too long ago.
It's the rush to construct them. These turbines have never been tested. They are the largest turbines ever built. They generate more, megawatts per turbine. The blades are longer. And I think the structural engineering on them is probably bad. It's all done on computer models because they've never been tested because we got to get them in the ocean.
I think the German firm Siemens over the past year has taken multi-billion-dollar losses because there were some manufacturing defects in their turbine blades. So I mean, that's quite possible.
GE is the same thing. GE has lost billions of dollars on their wind turbines, but I don't think it's just defects. I think it's the sheer size of it, and the engineering was not done right.
Yeah, well,
it's
defect.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to be seeing a lot more of this, and we'll be monitoring it here on the Climate Realism Show by the Heartland Institute, as will Steve at Junk Science, and Anthony at What's Up With That. So go ahead. One last point.
Sorry, yeah, I wanted to make one more comment about East Coasters and wind turbines, and that is for years and years and years, one of the arguments that people in these seaside communities have been using against against going in for any kind of oil exploration offshore, whether or not there is a decent field out there, but they have been saying for years that they don't want it because it will be an eyesore if they had a production platform out there. Well, I'm sorry, but these wind turbines are an awful eyesore, and it's I don't know if the communities are just totally getting steamrolled and they didn't want these, or if they're just willing to because they're told that it's green and it's a little bit of virtue signaling for them. But I don't know, if I was on Nantucket, I'd be pretty disappointed if I had to stare out to thousands and thousands of blinking red lights at night when I'm on the beach,
Right.
Well, the beach communities have been finding them for years. The beach communities have been finding them for years. They're being steamrolled.
But they can't afford to. You can't fight, the Biden administration plus all, the wealthy foreign companies. So
for sure. I mean, it's a choice. Do you want 4 platforms out there, or do you want 4,000 turbines out there? And it's a pretty easy choice.
One of our viewers pointed out that this is Jaws territory. And in that, since we're getting into memes next, I predict the meme in the future where we're going to have a picture of Roy Scheider, and he's going to say, "We need a bigger blade."
Andy's on a roll today. All right, so
or one of those mega sharks from the movies taking a blade down.
Yep. All right, well, let's get to those. Let's get to those memes real quick. Another thing we like to do to have a little fun. You got to have fun on your show. And that is a meme that Anthony again found. It says, one of the last coal-powered sheep. Most sheep are all electric now. And I'm sorry if you're only listening to this because you're going to have to see it to believe it. Hard to explain without getting gross. All right. And then the second...
the big problem with those sheep is getting them plugged in at night, by the way.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes. All the sheep are electric now. And if you're a Blade Runner fan, you kind of get that joke better than most. All right, and then the second thing here is actually a little bit more serious, and this was a tweet from Michael Mann. Hi, Mike, if you're watching, appreciate it. Dean Novadala has tweeted out a picture of the crowd at the Republican National Convention and said, "Bone-chilling to see RNC convention people chanting 'fight, fight' in unison with one arm punching in the air. Instantly conjures up rallies from 1930s Germany. There's just no other way to put it." And Professor Michael E. Mann reposts that with the comment, "If it looks like the Third Reich, swims like the Third Reich, and quacks like the Third Reich, well, there you go." So there's your media darling favorite climate scientist that all the corrupt mainstream media likes to put on TV as much as possible. Kind of engaging them in the kind of political discourse that we were told was pretty dangerous only a few days ago.
Right.
What?
That's right.
Yeah, right. I was about to say, it's nice to see that they're cooling the rhetoric after Saturday.
Yeah.
Well, and a couple tweets before he did this one, he likened J.D. Vance to Joseph Goebbels. So,
yeah.
I mean, he's just off the deep end.
To say Michael Mann is a piece of work doesn't even do justice to the man.
Right.
I mean, he's off the rails, and he
And-
doesn't
and yet
even see
nothing-
himself, you know. And
Nothing he says is litigable. You can't sue him for anything he says.
I'm careful. I'm not saying anything. I've got plenty of things I could say. I'll tell you that. But I'm self-muting right now.
Right.
You people have no idea how hard that is for Anthony. This is a very, very difficult thing to hold his tongue when it comes to Michael Mann.
For
And I
all of us.
appreciate that. Okay, well, let's go on to our main topic. Actually, that's a pretty good segue since we are talking about the Republican climate and energy agenda that came out of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee that closed last night. Guys, I looked at the platform and I did a word search. The word climate appears 0 times.
Yeah.
The word energy appears 18 times.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned on the at the top of the podcast today, Donald Trump led the assembled audience into chants of drill, baby, drill. And if you listen to his speech last night, where he got into a little bit of the policy that he's promoting, or I should say advocating for his second term, it seems like, Steve Milloy, a return to the energy, American energy first kind of policies that he had in his first term, deregulation to help speed these things along, but maybe turned up to 11 or put on a turbo boost. So anybody who actually wants America to get back to being an energy exporter, I believe, Steve Milloy, for the first time, was at the end of Trump's first term. I'm sure that's what you heard as well. How quickly do you think we can get to that, and how likely is it to happen?
Well, I think investment in energy production will tick up as soon as Trump is elected, because investors can have confidence that these projects will come to fruition. Trump in his 20-point plan and last night in his speech, he promised, drill, baby, drill, and American energy dominance. He promised to roll back the regulation that was holding us back. He also specifically promised to get rid of the EV mandate. So I think what's going to happen for sure is a lot like the first Trump administration. Agencies like EPA are going to be sat on. They're not going to be allowed to issue regulations that are hurting our energy production, and regulations that the Biden administration has promulgated are going to be rolled back as soon as they can. And of course, there's going to be lots of litigation about all this. And but the good news will be that investors will be encouraged to participate more. When Joe Biden came in and issued all those executive orders from the beginning about his starting his war on fossil fuels, he chilled investors. And so now we're producing record levels of oil, but for a while we weren't, and prices went through the roof, and OPEC was re-empowered. Now that U.S. energy production is going to be unleashed, and we're going to shoot for energy dominance, OPEC will no longer be in charge of the price of oil like they are now.
Yeah. Well, it's that's interesting, and there's a lot to dig into. I grabbed a few stories to share with the audience and with the panel here today. One of the first one here I'm going to share is from let's see what Trump 2.0 could mean for the environment. That is from the New York Times, and it reads here that as President Donald Trump's sweeping attempts to roll back federal environmental regulations were often stymied by the courts, by lack of experience, even by internal resistance from government employees. But if he retakes the White House in November, Mr. Trump would be in a far better position to dismantle environmental and climate rules, aided by a more sympathetic judges and conservative allies who are already mapping out ways to bend federal agencies to the president's will. If only that sounds so great. Myron Ebell.
I'm sorry. Is he not supposed to be the head of these federal agencies? They are part of the administration. He is charged with running these agencies. He puts people in to run them under him. They're supposed to be beholden to him.
That's right. Well, that's what people are going to learn, and that's what we didn't quite get from 2017 to 2020. So Myron Ebell, who joined you on the EPA Transition Team, Steve Milloy, said that he hopes to be able to move more quickly, more successfully in a second term. But on the campaign trail, and I think last night, Trump promised to repeal federal regulations designed to cut greenhouse gas pollution, another scare word that is false. That's propaganda. That is not science or journalism. That is rapidly heating the planet. Many of his allies want to go further. They're drafting plans to slash budgets, oust career staffers, embed loyalists in key offices, and scale back the government's powers to tackle climate change, regulate industries, and restrict hazardous chemicals. Guys, I can't support Donald Trump anymore. I can't go any higher in my support. New York Times, you have to stop feeding me this pro-Trump propaganda. My brain almost can't take it.
He would do something no president in history has ever done before. Put loyalists in positions of power in the offices. All these appointees are loyalists. They don't say, oh, who do I want to run this agency? People that hate me, people that disagree with me. Oh, that's who I want. No, they always appoint loyalists. And I want to say, some things he said, day one, I'll get rid of the EV mandate. Look, he can start the process, but that was a regulation. It went through a process. He's going to have to go through it. But there are some things he can do on day one. He can require further environmental reviews for offshore wind, because that's another day one promise he made, is that he'd end all the offshore wind. He can get us out of Paris day one. He doesn't have to have a press conference and a big briefing 3 months in. He could just sign a piece of paper and get us out of Paris. Or better yet, finally kill it by sending it to Congress as the Senate as a treaty, where it will not get the 2/3 vote necessary to become a binding treaty, and that will end it. There are some things he can do day one. There are some things that he has to do long term, but it requires appointing the right people, going through the proper processes. But when they say, "Oh, well, Trump was struck down so many times in the courts, he was restrained." Yeah, so was Obama restrained. His rules were thrown out left and right. So has Biden been restrained. His rules on LNG gone. His rules, one after the other. So don't pretend that Trump would be an outlier in the fact that they would have people that they trust put into positions of leadership, or that the courts will willy-nilly go along with some rules and not others. No, post Chevron defense death, they're going to look at all these rules much more stringently. And post major questions doctrine ruling, they're going to be looking at whether Congress should be involved in making, in finalizing these rules, or whether an executive agency, be it Biden's or Trump's, gets to just write the law willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Well, so Sterling, I mean, you're right about all that. And, agencies like EPA are going to be between two rocks and a hard place. You mentioned that, got rid of the Chevron, which means that EPA can no longer make up the law. And we got rid of, we had the major questions doctrine 2 years ago in West Virginia versus EPA, which says that EPA can only do what Congress authorized. And on top of this, now you have the Trump administration. Trump doesn't want EPA doing anything. So by all rights, EPA should be, not a factor in our economy anymore. But the reality is that, there's going to be resistance. These federal employees, they don't take direction. They think that they know better than everybody. And so the question for me is would President Trump appoint strong personalities that are going to be able to get a grip on the federal workforce? One of the things he's got to do is he's got to make it essentially a fireable offense for federal employee, for EPA employees to communicate with the media without authorization and to leak. I mean, we've got to get a grip on what federal employees are doing. We cannot allow this resistance to take shape. I mean, that's got to be a fireable offense too. If you work for EPA, you do what the administrator says. You don't do what you want. You do what you're told to do. You're an employee.
Well, another thing they can do, and I think this would be pretty effective, is what the Governor Shapiro is doing and what other people have done in the past. When there is a rule implemented by Biden that they think is wrong, and it's being challenged in court by, say, 25 attorneys generals from the state, the Justice Department can just not defend it. Trump can say, sorry, we're not going to defend the last administration's power rule. And let it go to court and let the court say, well, if the administration is not defending their own rule, there's a problem with it, and let it get destroyed that way.
Yeah. Well, you know, all these corrupt legacy media publications keep harping on this Project 2025 thing that Donald Trump said he didn't know anything about. The Heritage Foundation gets all of the blame. I mean, credit for Project 2025. But the truth is, there are a lot of other conservative organizations that are involved in setting what we think would be a good agenda for a second Trump term, and the Heartland Institute is among those for sure. But Anthony, you had just pointed out that Project 2025 states that an incoming Trump administration should all but dissolve the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, under which the National Weather Service operates. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but what do you think?
Well, Trump is going after the agencies that are pushing climate as an agenda, as justification for more funding or whatever. But the problem is that the National Weather Service under NOAA is one of the few really valuable government organizations that delivers to the public on a daily basis. And, you know, you have no idea how intertwined data from the National Weather Service is in everyday life, in the way that people plan their lives, how businesses plan their projects, and so forth and so on. The construction industry, all of these things, even wind turbine people have to pay attention to this stuff, right? So if they dissolve NOAA and then by the same token, National Weather Service, it's going to create chaos in terms of being able to get an accurate weather forecast, because then it's going to go basically to a subscription model. And yes, there might be some people that jump in there, but here's the real deal. Even the big names like the Weather Channel, WSI, all these outfits that run computer models, you know, like computermodels.com, and these places that get all of this weather data that's so fantastic comes from the National Weather Service, the raw data. And so if that goes away, it's going to be chaos, and it's actually going to be bad for our economy. The right thing to do is for Trump to delineate the Weather Service from NOAA and let the Weather Service operate on its own separately, and then do what he wants to do with NOAA, including gutting their whole climate regime.
Well, that's what, but if you read Project 25, that's precisely what it said. It says almost get rid of NOAA. You keep the National Weather Service in a couple of functions. The National Weather Service pre-existed NOAA. There was no NOAA when we created a National Weather Service. And my argument, at least from my point of view, I look at the Constitution and I say, is the government charged with doing X, Y, or Z? Is the federal government specifically delegated that power? And if not, that should go. And will that create some chaos? Sure. We built up years of bureaucracies around it, but the government ought to be doing only with what the Constitution allows it to do, and we can figure things out. We don't need NOAA. The National Weather Service can be its own standalone agency, like it was before NOAA existed and it was folded into it. Remember, NOAA is part of what? The Department of Commerce. NOAA was created not as some science agency. It was created to foster commerce by understanding the weather and how it affects commerce.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm going to look forward to climate.gov going dark. And I'm going to look forward to no one at NOAA being allowed to say the word climate, and that bogus graph they have purporting to show temperatures as point values since global temperatures as point values since 1850. All that stuff is going to go away. That's what
yeah. I mean, that brings me, yeah, hopefully. I mean, that brings me to my question for you, Steve, with a unique perspective. I mean, you were part of a team of very good people advising the Trump administration who had no government, a lot of them had no government experience on how to reform the Environmental Protection Agency. What would you say were the successes on that front, be they temporary or permanent? And what do you think Donald Trump and the new incoming administration has to do to either make the kinds of reforms you're talking about stick, maybe some other kind of strategy, or maybe just being braver, just being a little bit more firm and not listening to people that are trying to tear him down?
Yeah, well, we got off to a slow start because, the first EPA administrator in Trump self-immolated. He got caught up in a scandal, and that was, and his replacement, we got a lot done. There was a rule to reform how EPA did science passed. A lot of the Obama, war on coal regulations were repealed. But the problem is, the 2020 election happened, and Joe Biden basically reversed everything that Trump had reversed from Obama. So now we're going back the other way. I think we have learned a lot. People now understand there is the resistance that you have to deal with. The resistance slow walks things, sabotages things. We have to have people at agencies like EPA that understand the science, which is something that we didn't really have before. There are ways you have to go about this. We've been armed now with these 2 Supreme Court decisions the last couple of years, including the Chevron deference. So that'll, Myron Ebell is right. That'll make things easier in court. But these people are not going to go quietly into the night. They're going to have they are going to kick and scream and do whatever they can to sabotage Trump 2.0. So it's going to be a tough fight.
Well, actually, that I actually have a question on that, Steve, and maybe the whole panel can help out with this one. Chevron deference. So Chevron deference. My understanding, and I think everyone's understanding, is that it said that the agencies are not allowed to basically make up law and policies willy-nilly on their own without guidance or more strict guidance or even explicit instruction from Congress to do so. Yeah. And that is how we have had regulations ratcheted up. They never ratchet back. They always go up. One more notch. Yeah. So in light of Chevron, is it possible to take that ratchet and bring it back down to more reality, or does Chevron actually make that more difficult than it would have been without it?
Well, so the case,
getting rid of Chevron, that is.
The case you talked about, Loper Enterprises, which reversed Chevron, says that courts no longer have to defer to agency interpretation when laws are vague. So now, courts are going to be empowered to make these decisions. Well, of course, if you go to a Democrat-appointed judge, you're probably going to get deference to, the agency. If you go to a Republican appointed judge, you're not. It just, it gives plaintiffs a better chance to argue about what that the agency has exceeded its mandate and the law. We'll have to see how it plays out. I mean, if I was a judge, I would hold the agencies to precisely what Congress has authorized them to do and no more. And unfortunately, or fortunately, Congress has written some very vague laws and has given the agencies a lot of flexibility, too much leeway in determining, what terms mean. What does the word safe mean? And when you get to chemical risk assessment or radiation risk assessment or climate or air quality or water quality, whatever, there's just EPA's had a lot of leeway. Well, I don't think it needs to have that much leeway anymore. And Congress wants to regulate. It should tell the agency what to do, and then make sure the agency does what Congress wanted.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Anyone else have a thought on that before we go to their wonderful Q&A from our audience?
Nope.
No. Linnea, you can take it away. I think we have some excellent questions from our chat here on YouTube. So hit it.
All right. So our first question is coming from Jacob H. And he asks, don't these windmill parks need an environmental impact assessment, including estimates of the consequences of all kinds of accidents? If anyone has
the short answer is they do have to do environmental impact assessments, but they are much less thorough than if it were an oil rig or a pipeline. The environmentalists have always fought for the precautionary principle with regard to those. And so they say you must look at all the downstream possible effects, all the ancillary effects. If you don't, they wind up in court saying you shouldn't take this into account or that into account. And especially with climate. Oh, what are the greenhouse gas emissions? What are the effects on species? When it comes to wind, the environmentalists aren't challenging it. In fact, they're saying, oh, no, that precautionary stuff. No, we've got to get this stuff in to save the earth. We got to save the earth. This is about saving the earth. And so they're not out there suing to block it. And Heartland is involved in one lawsuit, but let's face it, we don't have the deep pockets that a lot of these groups do. So we can't sue interminably and for every case to hold it up. all we can do is go into the court with what the law says. In our whale case, we say, what you did not do is what the law, what the regulations require, which is do a cumulative analysis of all these wind farms up and down the coast on the whales.
Yeah.
You can't just take it in a slice of it, just this one farm, and say, well, we've decided it won't affect the whales, but next door, combine it with next doors, it could kill them all. No, you got to take it all into account.
Yeah.
So they do have to do those things, but how thorough they are depends on whether the administration is favorable to the development and whether the environmentalists are disfavorable to the development.
Yeah. I mean, and if an endangered bird flies over the fence at a coal plant and dies of natural causes, the operator of that coal plant is in a heap big of trouble. But those wind turbines are allowed to chop up as many endangered birds as they like, pretty much without any restrictions whatsoever. And that is to the point, Sterling, that the environmental rules that traditional reliable energy companies have to deal with are not the same rules that the so-called green energy producers have to deal with.
Right. Rather unbelievably, major wind turbine facilities tend to get take limits for things like bald eagles and stuff. So I don't really think that they're giving take limits to oil development or anything, or really any other.
I mean, so NOAA has permitted take for the endangered North Atlantic right whale twice as many whales as exist. I mean, would ExxonMobil be allowed to get a permit like that? No.
No. All right. What else? Anthony, you're on mute, sir. Yep. Anthony, you were muted there with your quip.
Sorry about that. I was saying that if they had named it the left whale, this wouldn't be happening.
Andy, you got to keep your finger on the rim shot trigger whenever Anthony's coming in. All right.
This is another really this is a great question from Andrew Pickard. He says, "Does Michael Mann run on steam?"
He's
And that's
steampunk.
for you.
Steampunk.
Yeah, that's for you, Anthony. Okay, let's see.
I think this. I don't think this can get me in trouble. I think he runs on methane, but we'll see.
Comes out both ends.
Yeah. Okay. And then from Michael Johansson, I'm guessing is the pronunciation here. He says, "Will Trump, if elected, pull out of the Paris Agreement again?"
Probably.
One hopes.
Yeah, he hasn't mentioned that, but I think he probably will. I mean, what's the point of staying in?
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't mentioned it. I mean, I think he has enough policies that are already triggering the left. He can always add that in there and distract them. But
right, I mean, if he talked about everything he was going to do or needed to do, I mean, he'd still be talking.
Well, look, the thing is, he was successful where no other president was successful in getting multiple treaties in the Middle East between largely Muslim countries and Israel, right? Carter got one with Egypt more than 40 years ago, and then nobody. And he got 5 of them in his last 6 months of his administration. How did he do that? He does it quietly. When he got out of Paris the last time, it was a big hullabaloo. He had a big press conference. It was 3 or 4 months into his administration. It was like May, and everyone was around. He doesn't have to do that. He can quietly, behind the scenes, sign a piece of paper, submit it, and say, we're out. And he'll still get the backlash because it'll become noticed, but it won't have to generate all the publicity. And more importantly, like I said, he could, if he wanted to, he could submit it to the Senate and say, look, I'm not doing this. I'm leaving it to the Senate. The Senate is where treaties are supposed to go. This will not be binding on the United States of America until the Senate itself acts to approve the treaty. And since the Senate, even if Democrats remain in control, doesn't have the votes to approve the treaty, it's dead.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Okay. This is one that was asked several times. Oh, and also I wanted to mention that Douglas Pollock also mentioned that same question. I just wanted to give a shout out to him because he is always watching our show and he's a friend of Heartland. Diane Selby asks, will Keystone Pipeline Project be approved and completed now? And I have an answer to that. The answer is no. And this is why. And I saw that this was discussed at length in the comments. It's not just because I don't think Trudeau gets to choose necessarily whether or not this goes forward. The company has pulled out. It's not so much like waiting between administrations that was killing them. It was the dozens of lawsuits from different angles coming at them. It was the lawfare that ended up making the company decide to shutter it completely, whether or not the Biden administration closed them down. So it just wasn't worth it to them anymore to keep fighting it. It was a Canadian company. It's only one segment, and what they're doing, I think, is they're rerouting. They're building a different pipeline, like somewhere else, which is unfortunate for us. But yeah, it's not going. It's probably not going to go through, regardless of how good Trump's policy is on this. Where'd everybody go? There we go. Yeah. So I would be surprised if they did. The company put out a big statement last year, maybe the year before, explaining that, it doesn't even matter if a new administration comes in. It's too expensive to keep up with the lawfare, which is a shame.
Yep.
Well, something else good will happen. Keystone XL is not the end of the world.
Yeah, no, it's not the end of the world. There's other pipelines. Yeah, it'll be okay. It's just a bummer because they did fight it for a very long time.
If only we could ship oil over the internet.
Let's see. And then we have Andrew Godridge, our friend. He asks, why have once respected and trusted professions become so embarrassing? Here in England, doctors face calls to reduce carbon footprints by promoting remote appointments.
I think it had to do with the idea that it's a noble cause corruption. I've talked about this before. We're saving the planet, so we're doing something noble, and we have to spread the word. And so we have to have trusted leaders also be part of the whole thing. And they get caught up in this feeling of we're saving the planet, we're doing something noble. And so people that are in trusted positions want to continue with that vision of being in a trusted position, and they think that this is somehow going to help them, when in fact all it does is it aggravates their patients and their clients and so forth.
Yeah. Well, so my thought on this is that the left has been after every institution for more than 100 years now. So they own all these institutions. They set policy for all the institutions. They control the institutions. And if you want to be part of the institutional world, you've got to do what they say. And this is the kind of crap you get. And, if you want to be a scientist, you're going to have to do work on climate. And you're not going to get grants if you say that, climate's not what the institution says it is. So, not everybody can be like us and be free thinkers and, not part of the institutional world. A lot of people want to be part of that institutional world, so they have to buy into the beliefs.
Yep, 100%. Linnea, you got something else?
Busted.
Yeah,
my water there. All right, this is a funny question from Bo Gus. He asks, for Steve, can somebody get Trump to make all climate research contingent on proving the globe is cooling, and then we can call them out when they follow the money?
Well, Anthony, didn't you do something on this not too long ago? Is it cooling or warming? Well, it all depends on when you start, right? If you go back long enough, it's cooling.
It's
isn't that right, Anthony?
Yep. Well, it is certainly true that if you go back far enough, it's cooling.
So it all depends on where you want to start. So the whole thing is just arbitrary.
Right. But I do think it's a very clever idea, though, that if you
just
that's how all this started. Like even the IPCC, but its mandate was not to find out what was happening to the climate. Its mandate was to find out man's effect on warming the climate. If you're given those instructions like a good doggy, you'll go fetch, and that's exactly what they've done for the last 30 years.
We just have to drop out of all these international organizations. They're absolutely no good.
Yeah, if you go back all the way to the Big Bang, where the temperature of all matter was like millions of degrees, we're definitely cooling.
So there you go.
All right.
Okay, and our last question here. You guys are going to like this one, and that is, so what is the solution to climate change?
Yeah. What climate?
Ignore it.
What climate change are people talking about? It's hot in the summer. It's cold in the winter. Varies in the spring and fall.
Deserts are dry.
Deserts. Yeah. I mean, what is
You'll get rain.
I will point out that the majority of human history, we ignored climate. We didn't pay any attention to it at all. We paid attention to the weather. That was the big deal, the day-to-day change.
Yeah.
You talk about. I want to go back. I had myself on mute, so I didn't get to chime in on the professions being corrupted question. So NatWest Bank recently, it's a bank in the Northwest largely. It has a lot of agricultural clients, has a lot of farmers and things, and they recently started advising their clients to stop eating meat and dairy and to save the world. The bank's getting into telling you how you should live your life. There's been some pushback. Evidently, they're watering down that advice. But I mean, this is the kind of world we live in, where doctors are supposed to embrace gun control and tell you what to do with guns in your homes, and banks are supposed to tell you what kind of meals you should be eating and where you should turn your thermostat up to. It's none of their business. Their job is to manage my money, to provide me an account, to make loans if I meet sufficient conditions or not for some reason. But what they're not charged with doing, doctors or lawyers or bankers or anybody else, to tell me how to live my life vis-a-vis carbon dioxide.
Well said, Sterling Burnett. All right. With no other questions, I think that is going to do it for today's episode of the Climate Realism Show, episode number 119. I want to thank everybody who has been watching or listening to this stream today, especially all of you on X, especially all of you who follow Steve Milloy at Junk Science on X. A lot of you guys were here today, and we hope to see you again. Always visit some of Heartland's best websites on the climate. Always go to heartland.org, climaterealism.com, climateataglance.com, energyataglance.com. Hey, while you're at it, go to whatsupwiththat.com, and don't ever forget to visit junkscience.com. That's the website of our guest today, climate hoax slayer and enemy number one of climate leftist Steve Milloy. Thank you all for watching and listening, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
How dare you!
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.